Bloodiest. We're so grateful for your support. This program is brought to you by the Turner Foundation, which you can find at theturnerfoundation.com. They present this program, and you can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org. Many of you are from all over the world, 98 countries, all 50 states, just in the last 12 months. So we're so gratified by your support. We're so grateful for those of you who watch locally here in Santa Barbara, California, where we're sitting. And so thank you for all of that. And you can also find us at all the social media platforms, Good Life TV, Good Life Television. So we'd love to have you follow us there. I'm really excited about my guest today. C Barber is with me. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let me just give a little bit of background. Stephen is a director, producer, writer, filmmaker. He's done some amazing projects that we're going to talk about. Using story and the power of story, his power of storytelling in film. But let's go back to where you started. How did you end up, you're at a military school for 3 years, you're at Western Kentucky. How'd you end up in California making movies?
Well, it's funny. My father, we actually moved to Montecito when I was a kid because my father, yeah, just briefly, because my father worked for General Motors and he worked on the moon buggy. So he came out here for a couple of years. So I got the flavor as a child. You know, nice. This is not a bad place to start. Yeah. Then we ended up going back to upstate New York because my father worked at General Motors. He got tired of that. He wanted to be kind of a big fish in a small pond. He was from upstate New York. He'd been with General Motors about 18 years, and it didn't see much lateral movement there, so he decided to move the family to Woodstock, New York, where he ran a company called Waterline as an engineer. So I started there, and literally when I graduated from high school, my grades weren't that good. So I wasn't accepted to a lot of colleges, I'll be real honest. So Western Kentucky was very excited about having me because I was out of state tuition. So that's the truth. I'd love to tell you that I'm a Rhodes Scholar, but I wasn't. So I ended up in Kentucky. I did really well when I was down there. I got my Bachelor of Arts. And then I said, you know, I loved California as a kid. I want to come back out here. So I came out in '84. I came out during the Olympics. That was kind of my graduation present. And I've been here ever since.
And what did you start doing?
Well, like everybody, I came out here to be an actor, but I had a degree in TV and radio production, so I really wanted to be a disc jockey. But in 1984, I mean, terrestrial radio was kind of at zenith, so you couldn't get on KLOS and you couldn't get on KMET. You had to be #1 in Chicago to get on the air in Los Angeles, which is not the case now. You and I could start tomorrow. It's a whole different deal. So that dream kind of fell apart, and then I started doing acting because people said, well, you look like an actor. I was like, okay, fine. And I did okay. I did a bunch of extra stuff. I worked on General Hospital, and I worked on One Life to Live, and I worked on Santa Barbara, a TV show called Santa. Yeah. And I never liked it. But what I did learn, which was interesting, was I liked the guy that was barking out all the orders. I liked the director. I liked that guy. I said, you know what, that's the job to have. So that kind of set the seed in me, because it never really occurred to me to make a movie until that happened. Oh. So I'd had a little background. I'd been on maybe 30 or 40 sets as an extra. So I got to see the director's work. Right. And I was always impressed with it. I was like, if I was ever going to do that, forget the acting thing. That's the job, the guy who's giving out all the orders. Right. So that's how it kind of started.
Fascinating. And then you ended up on cruise ships.
Yeah, you know, one day I'd been out in LA 3 or 4 years, and I was literally going down the 405, and I just said, this is horrific. Now, this is 40 years ago.
Still horrific.
It's still horrific. And I went, I got to do something. And this was before the internet, and I had seen an ad in maybe, I think it might have been Screen Daily or a thing called Dramalog. And in the little tiny ad said, you know, disc jockey, cruise ship, Alaska. And I was like, I'm in. You know, I called this guy up. I remember his name. His name was Don Blanton. And I went down to Huntington Beach, and I walked in, and Don said, when can you start? I'm like, tomorrow. He goes, can you start today? And I said, yeah. He said, I need you to fly out tonight. The ship leaves tomorrow. So that was the beginning.
No way.
Yeah, that was the beginning of a 12-year adventure on cruise ships. In fact, Gavin McLeod, who just died 3 days ago. Yes. Gavin was a good friend of mine. I'd met him on many ships, and so I started this. I was on ships before the Love Boat. You know, I did that ship went to Ketchikan, Juneau, Sitka, Skagway, Glacier Bay, and I was the disc jockey on a ship it was a Sitmar ship, which no longer exists. It was kind of Princess absorbed their last 4 ships, but it was a very regal Italian cruise line that no longer exists. So that's how I started my cruise career. I did that on and off for like 12 years. I ended up working on 17 ships.
Wow.
So I've seen the world. It's
Yeah.
it's round.
It's
Yeah,
round.
yeah.
I was reading 10 million nautical miles.
At least.
That's
Amazing. Yeah, that was asleep. I don't know what I did awake, but yeah.
And you did write a novel, a fiction
I wrote a book.
novel.
That's how I kind of got into Hollywood. I wrote a book called Below the Waterline, which is on Amazon right now. I think I've sold about 422 books in the last 10 years. You know, it's not a huge seller, but it should be. But it's a very good book. It's about a guy who basically goes to sea and finds love and finds redemption. And I wrote it with this great guy named Jack Krennick, who was a model for years and years and years. And Jack and I became great friends. And Jack's out of the business now. He was actually very big back in the 70s with Tom Selleck and Corbin Bernsen. He was one of those supermodel guys. And when I told him the story about some of my exploits, he goes, "Man, this is a novel. Let's turn this into a screenplay." And that's how I really got into Hollywood, because I took the book once it was finished to Merv Griffin, who's no longer with us, but everybody remembers Merv Griffin, Wheel of Fortune, and many others, the Merv Griffin Show. And he optioned it for $15,000, which I thought, oh man, I'm in. I'm retired. You know, Merv Griffin optioned my book. And then he sat on it for 3 years. Nothing happened. And then he passed away, and then I got the rights back. But it's, you know, one day day we'll turn it into a movie.
Below the Waterline.
Yeah.
So you came back to Hollywood in the mid-90s, and you did a few different things.
Right.
But the one I want to talk about was your first film, Return to Tarawa, an award-winning documentary that has had an impact, not just from the people who've seen it, but what's happened because people saw that story. But this is the story it's a story of redemption and healing of a 90-year-old World War II veteran named Leon Cooper.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about this.
Magical. I had met Eddie Albert 25 years ago on a mountain bike ride. Remember, some folks, your audience might be too young, but Eddie Albert was a huge actor in the 40s and 50s, major. He was with Ronald Reagan. He worked with Humphrey Bogart. He worked with the biggest in the world. But he's known for a TV show called Green Acres, which people know. Yeah. He was a real hero. In fact, he received the Silver Star, but he should have received the Medal of Honor. He saved 80 Marines in this battle called Tarawa. I'd never heard of it, but I had seen him on a bicycle ride. And the funny thing was that I met Tom Hanks 5 minutes before Eddie. And I kind of circled Tom, and I literally dropped a book off at his house below the waterline to see if he'd be interested. Now, this is before I knew anything, right? And he was none too pleased that I dropped the book off. He's like, "Nah, you got to go through my agent, but good luck." And literally 5 minutes later, I ran into Eddie Albert. Literally. Eddie was 95. He looked just like he did on the TV show. He was as affable as a guy could be. I said, "I'm a writer. I'd love to come interview you." He's like, "Heck yeah, come on over. Everybody thinks I'm dead. This is great." Absolutely. Did a story on him. Nobody ever bought the story, but he and I became great friends. I would go over every Friday and have lunch with him. And he was battling Alzheimer's. And he would sometimes know me, sometimes not. But that went on a couple of years. And he was just this lovely, amazing American hero. And he literally saved. So he told me about this battle. And I videotaped him. I had a buddy of mine back then who had a video camera. This is '98. And I had that videotape. So we used that in the movie.
Wow.
Went for the second one until they were home. And we used that footage of Eddie. It's real grainy and kind of not that professional, but it looks, in a documentary format, it looks like you actually did that.
Right.
You went out of your way to make it look like this, right?
Right.
And if I had not, it's funny how life is. If I had not ridden my bike by that man that day, I wouldn't be sitting here with you. I mean, that trajectory took me to, building monuments and making movies, and quite incredible. And he lived to 99. Eddie lived till 2007 or 2008. Yeah.
Wow. So that's how you found out about Tarawa.
That's how I found out about it. And then literally 10 years later, I was at the book fair at it's at USC now, but it was at UCLA. And I like people over 90 and under 6, and like everybody else is suspect, right? So I saw this 90-year-old guy sitting by himself in a booth. And I walked over to him and I said, "What are you doing, old timer?" He's like, "Who you calling old timer?" And I'm like, "Oh, I love this guy." And then he had a book about Tarawa, and I was like, "Were you in Tarawa?" He goes, "I was in that battle. I saw 6,000 people murdered." And I'm like, "Oh my God. Did you know Eddie Albert?" I saw him in the lagoon, Dragon Marine." I'm like, "Oh my," just couldn't believe it. So that's how it started. He and I became good friends. About 8 or 9 months into it, he bootstrapped the whole thing. He gave me $200,000, and it's amazing what you can do with $200,000. So we made this incredible movie. Ed Harris knew Leon. He loved Leon. Ed narrated it for us. So he went on. He was such an affable guy. He went on the Larry King show with us.
Wow.
He's helped support us, and then he narrated 2 or 3 more movies with us.
Wow.
But he didn't really like me that much, but he liked Leon. I mean, he liked me, but he loved Leon. He wasn't doing it for me. He did it for Mr. Cooper. But that took us to Until They Are Home with Kelsey Grammer. And then then I kind of skyrocketed my career in documentaries. We did a movie called Unbeaten,
Yep.
the world's longest wheelchair race. In fact, my producing partner Robert Farrell is here right now. He was inspirational in making that happen. It was his friend Jeffrey Erickson who's left us was the inspiration to do that movie, and it's just been going ever since. You know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Tarawa for a second. So, talk about what happened after this. You before we came on air, you were talking to me about you got a phone call from a
Well, what
congressman.
happened is the power of the narrative,
Yeah.
like what you're doing right now,
Yeah.
what you and I are doing. Somebody's watching this. Somebody's looking at this right now, and they may have an uncle or a cousin that was in the Battle of Tarawa or a grandfather,
Right.
but you just don't know.
Right.
So what happened was I really hit a home run with that movie. Discovery Channel picked it up, and Military Channel played it for like 3 years. I mean, millions of people saw it.
Yeah.
And what happened was there was an Alderman Balser, a guy named Mike Balser out of Chicago, who was a Marine, and he was in Hamburger Hill in Vietnam, and gun ho. And he called me up one day. He's like, Steve Barber, and I said, yeah. He goes, my name's Alderman Balser. You're trying to tell me there's 500 Marines still buried on that island? I said about 800 or 900. And he said, unacceptable, and he hung up on me. And I'm like, okay, whatever that was. I mean, I had no idea what that was. And about a year later, I get a call from Congressman Lipinski, Dan Lipinski, out of Chicago, and he said, this guy Balser called me. He was really upset. He wanted to bring these Marines home, so I passed this bill, and we got $1.3 million of congressional legislation money, and we're going back to Tarawa with 17 Marines. Do you want to go? I was like, sure. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And that's when we filmed Until They Are Home, the second movie. And I would have never thought about doing that movie because Tarawa is 20,000 miles from here. It's on the other side of the earth. It's not a beautiful place.
Right.
It's a bad place. And I was not interested in going back. But then, of course, then I raised some more money to do that. So it's like I said, it's been going ever since.
And how did you end up working with Kelsey Grammer on this?
Well, Kelsey, I could tell you that we were best friends. It was nothing like that. He was sitting in a restaurant, Marmalade, in Malibu. He was sitting next to me. And
You bump into them.
yeah, well, I live in LA, right? He was sitting next to me, and I walked up to him, and I gave him my card. And of course, I hit him up for some money. That's what I do. It's like, if you're a multimillionaire, I'd like to help you take some of your ill-gotten gains and and move it into some good stuff.
Put it to good work.
And he couldn't have been nice. He was like, Steve, I don't give out money. I mean, everybody hits me up for money. But he called me. He goes, I looked at your work. I love Leon. Ed Harris is a dear friend. He says, if you need my voice, I'm in. So that's how that happened. And he's done 3 or 4. He's done a couple Wounded Warrior commercials for me. He's just a really lovely guy. Nothing bad to say about Kelsey. Good-hearted guy.
Wow.
It's not easy to get money out of, but his voice is good.
Right.
Voice is worth $1 million.
Right.
So that's how that worked out.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Unbeaten, because we actually have a special needs child, and so it kind of grabs my heart a little bit to hear about a project like this. But talk about kind of the heart of Unbeaten and how it came to be.
Well, once again, my producing partner who's here, Bob Farrell, had a good friend named Jeffrey Erickson. They've been friends for 20 years. They've been sailing together. Jeffrey had become a quadriplegic in a motorcycle wreck. Jeffrey was really cool about it, though. Jeffrey didn't get down. He goes, look, man, I've been drinking. I hit the wrong turn. I broke my back. And he moved on with his life. He goes, it was my fault. And then he found out about this race where you could push your wheelchair 300 miles in 6 days, 55 miles a day in wheelchairs. So he did it 4, 5, 6 years. And one year, I used to see him in my garage working on Bob's car, which was just really bizarre because he was all arms. The guy was like Popeye, right? But he was in a wheelchair. And he'd have this car popped up. I'm like, nothing stops this guy. This guy's doing a brake job on my buddy's car. And one day, we never really spoke. I mean, I'd seen him throughout the years. And one day, he just wheeled his chair up, man. He goes, hey, I hear you know people with money. I said, maybe. And he's like, I know a couple guys. He goes, well, I need, a few grand to do this race. And I said, you know what? And I stopped it was funny because this is interesting because I was busy pitching the Steve Barber book and the Steve Barber movie and blah, 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 right? When I stopped to help a guy in a wheelchair, completely selflessly, didn't want anything out of it, wasn't trying to get any, didn't even think about a movie. was just trying to help this guy get a few grand to do this race. My whole world exploded. When I helped this guy selflessly, I took it to JP DeJoria, the CEO of Paul Mitchell, who I'd known. He's like, Steve, here's 25 grand. Go up there, get some video. We'll put it up on the website. You know, the internet was new. Social media was new. It was 2007. Yeah, so we'll put some stuff on this thing called the Facebook, right? Like, okay, we'll put it on the Facebook, right? And when I went up there, I had bought a camera. I had never shot a movie. When Bob and I were driving, the very first scene was Jeff going down this Parks Highway at 40 miles an hour. It was just unbelievable. So I was like, you know, Bob's driving. I'm like, dude, look in the viewfinder. Look what we both looked at each other. This is a movie, like absolutely. So we ended up shooting as much as we could. Did an okay job. It wasn't great, but we did what we could because we didn't expect to shoot a movie. We only had one camera, lots of stills, and we took it to an editor, and he said, you know what, I can bring all the racers back in, and we can kind of relive the story, use your still shots, use the video you shot, and we could tell a story here. Yeah. And that's what we did. So that movie ended up getting on the Oscar shortlist. Yeah. It's like all this happened. I'd love to tell you that I'm this unbelievable filmmaker and I've got all this talent and I went to film school. None of that's true. I'm just on a very divine path that things have gotten done, you know.
Well, and you make things happen. It's in fact this one article I was reading about you. It says when director, producer, writer, and filmmaker Stephen Barber gets his mind made up to do something, move over. I mean, somehow you put.
I have a lot of passion.
Yeah.
And really, if you have a lot of passion, if you have a vision, it's not always going to happen, and it might always not be what you want to happen, but something will happen.
Right.
Whatever that, you know, like I know we're going to talk about the monuments in a little bit. Yeah. It never occurred to me to build a monument. This is just my journey on a daily basis. So getting up every morning and swinging the bat. And America's just this amazing country. I mean, it's still an amazing country, no matter what anybody says. If you have an idea and you have passion and you have vision, you can get it done. It might not be what you wanted, but it could be something very good.
And even better.
And even better.
Yeah.
Which has happened to me, yeah.
Yeah. And before we get to this project, we were talking about this earlier too, but the power of story. There's everybody has a story. Mm-hmm. Some of our stories are together, like Tarawa or these great folks in the Unbeaten movie. But what is it about story that grabs people, that moves people?
Well, this is just my opinion. I remember thinking, why is America so amazing? Why have we sent people to why have we been to Mars? Why have we been to the moon? Why we've only been here 250 years? I mean, Greece has been around 3,000-4,000 years. Rome's been around 3,000 years. You know, I mean, all these other countries have been around thousands of years. But I liken it back to the Constitution. You know, we the people. You know, it's like that piece of paper, that story, even still today, the Constitution resonates with so many people 250 years later. That it's really that document, and it was divinely inspired. It was written by, you know, Washington and Jefferson and, you know, Button Gwinnett. Don't forget Button Gwinnett, you know, and these stories and that concept, to this day, people argue over the Constitution, you know, every single day. So, and the story of Christ. I mean, look at the story of Christ. There was no internet back then. I mean, that story's gone around. You know, that must have happened. You know, that's all I can figure. I mean, I wasn't there.
It's had a little impact.
But I mean, look at that story. I mean, and you know, it's unbelievable to me. So, story, if it resonates with the right people, it just kind of explodes and it just keeps moving. You know.
And you know, it's powerful when Jesus wanted to teach, he used story.
Well, exactly.
The Bible's full of this.
And I wasn't there, and I mean, I love the story of Christ, but I can't prove that. It's all faith, right? Yeah. It's all faith. I can't prove that happened, but boy, I'm about 100% sure it's happened, because how could it have gone how could it have gone 2 millennia and it's still the same story? It hasn't, you know, so interesting stuff.
Well, I want to talk about this monument that we're looking at here on set. That you probably can see this statue.
That's Jack Schweitzer. That's an original mock-up that weighs about 70 pounds. It's gold and bronze. The Lundin sculptors made that. Now, Jack's been standing 7 feet tall actually 12 feet tall at the Capitol for 25 years. Kevin Bacon played him in the movie, so if people can relate to who he is. He died of a horrific cancer in 1982. He had just won a seat to Congress, but he died of cancer. He's only 62. So the Lundin sculptors built that, and I had seen that 12 years ago doing a shoot for the Marine Corps, and it was a pro bono shoot. I tried to get paid, but nobody would pay me. I said, I'll do it on my own dime. And it cost me a couple grand, but it was the best 2,000 bucks I ever spent because I saw that monument and it stuck with me. So when I decided to try to build a monument, I reached out to the Lundin sculptors out of Loveland. I wouldn't have known where to look otherwise.
Yeah. So in 2018 you envisioned, fundraised, commissioned, and then unveiled $750,000 gold and bronze monument of the crew of Apollo 11 at the Kennedy Space Center for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. How did that happen?
You know, my wife has this great adage that sometimes success sneaks through the back door disguised as failure. And that was one of those days where I had this project with Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, who I've known for years, go down. They decided that for many reasons, we couldn't do this documentary that I've been working on a couple of years. And I was crushed. I was like, oh my God, we're 10 months away from the 50th anniversary. You know, I was going to sell this to, you know, Discovery and whatever. I had all these dreams, right? Gone, like that.
Wow.
So I took a bike ride. Just took this mountain bike ride, and I had this epiphany in the middle of the bike ride to build monuments. I can't tell you where it came from, can't tell you why it came. And then as I'm driving, I'm thinking, well, this is a great idea. I'll build 12 of these guys, 12 of the guys that landed on the moon. And then as I'm riding down the hill, I'm like, well, this is not a good idea. I'm sure somebody's built these monuments. These are the guys. Nobody had built any monuments. Every rapper, every basketball player, every baseball player has a monument. You have a monument. I have a monument. These guys didn't have monuments. Couldn't believe it. So I got on the phone and I called NASA 67 times. Nobody would pick up the phone. I kept calling and calling and calling. Finally, the woman that picked up the phone said, Mr. Barber, I know you know Buzz Aldrin. That doesn't help. We don't make monuments. We're not artists. We put people into space. And I said, I know, but this is, you know, we're 9 months away from the 50th. I think this is a great opportunity. You know, it's a one-time deal. And she's like, well, I can't help you. And literally, I'm hanging up the phone, and she goes, however, and I heard this, however. I go, yes, you may want to call the Kennedy Space Center. They're more of a theme park. We own them, but we delegate it to a company called Delaware North. They're a concessionaire. They might have room for it. They might be interested. Not knowing anything, I called the Kennedy Space Center. The guy who picks up the phone, his name is Theron Protze. I'm pitching him this deal, and he goes, are you the Steve Barber that did the movie Return to Tarawa? I kid you not.
No way.
I'm like, that's never happened. I said, come on. How would you know that? He goes, I'm a Marine. I'm Googling you. You're the real deal. He goes, okay, how much? Where do you want to put them? I said, I want to put in 12. He goes, we can't do 12. I don't have room for 12. He goes, why don't you stick to the crew of Apollo 11? And if you can get the money for that, I'll put him in. I go, you don't want to pay for him? He goes, no, I don't want to pay. I just spent 10 million bucks refurbishing this place for the 50th. But he goes, we're building this moon garden. I knew nothing about it. We're building this moon garden. This could be the centerpiece of our moon garden. He goes, you got 90 days, Barber. And he hung up on me. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So then I got on the phone. I had shot a movie with Dan Gilbert, who owns Rocket Mortgage, 10 years earlier. A movie called The Carrier. It was the first basketball game on the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson. I don't make any of this up. So I was the lone filmmaker on that shoot. I had this relationship with Dan Gilbert, who's worth $52 billion and has a company called Rocket Mortgage. Well, that's about as perfect as anything could be. But it took me 3 months to get them to do it. They liked it, but it was really off their course. It's not what they do. They work with Tiger Woods, they work with golfers. They're real sports centric. And everything that Dan does, Dan is literally single-handedly rebuilding Detroit. He's a great guy, great philanthropist. He's put $10 billion into Detroit already. Wow. And even though I grew up a little bit in Detroit because my dad was a General Motors engineer, and I tried to use that. I'm like, well, Dan, I grew up in Sterling Heights. He's like, Barber, that's not going to work. He goes, I need it to be Detroit-centric. Anyway, as we moved closer and the media started getting pretty big on the 50th, they decided to do it, which was just unbelievable. I couldn't, to this day, I couldn't believe it. And we did Apollo 11. We did a big, gigantic, 1,000 people came out for the unveiling. And then I had the idea to do Apollo 12, and they told me no. So I contacted Jim Lovell, and we just unveiled Apollo 13. So I just built Apollo 13.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm working on Dr. Sally Ride now, the first American woman in space, because through this journey I realized there are 0 monuments to any women at NASA, which is absurd because 65 women have flown in space, 12,000 women have worked at NASA, and there's not one plaque, there's not one monument, there's not much diversity at NASA, you know, and that needs to change, especially what's been going on the last year with Confederate monuments toppling and stuff like that. So it's time to build some inspirational monuments that the people are going to like. So I'm working on Sally Ride. I've already got it half funded, And if anybody's watching, they want to write the other check for 150 grand, I'm available. Yeah, yeah.
And so talk about, I mean, the preserving the dream, and kind of.
I changed the title. That's the original title. The new title of the movie is called We Must Be Bold, and it's taken from the Kennedy speech at Rice University.
Yeah, right.
Because in the middle of the speech, he goes, he says, "I want the United States to land a man on the moon and return him safely to to Earth at the end of this decade, because we must be bold." And when I heard that, I was like, "Oh man, I love that."
Perfect.
So I grabbed that, and it was an homage to President Kennedy. And the movie's great. I shot another movie, documentary. I haven't sold it yet, but I've got it online. And Patrick Warburton from Seinfeld fame.
Okay.
He's also, people might know him from the National Rent-A-Car guy. And he's on Family Guy. He's got that booming voice. He turned it into a symphony. So the movie's quite good. It's called We Must Be Bold: The Building of the Apollo 11 Monument.
We must be bold.
We must be bold. And I have that. I haven't sold it yet, but I may never sell it. It just may be the one film I don't sell. I just use it for marketing purposes. But it's 52 minutes. It's really very good. And now I'm working. I mean, my goal is to build all the Apollo moon missions. I will do it.
Wow.
I don't know how much time it's going to take, but I've got 2 done.
Yeah.
So I got.
And
5.
where will they all go?
Well, that's the problem. NASA's kind of, for whatever reason, doesn't want to build anymore. There's a lot of politics. I mean, the fact that I got these 2 monuments done is nothing less than a miracle. It's miraculous. I mean, I'm not a man of means. I live in a nice, place, and I make a decent living, but I'm not Jeff Bezos. I don't have that kind of dough. And I've taken it to the Jeff Bezos of the world. I take it to, it's never about the money. Everyone I take it to is a gazillionaire.
Yeah.
They have to be interested in it. It's got to be part of their stream of consciousness.
Yeah. Well, and you're bringing some meaning to them.
I try, and that's the pitch. It's like, look, man, this is a legacy piece. You've got $10 billion. What are people going to remember you for?
Right.
Rocket Mortgage, and my thing is, I could drop tomorrow, and I left 2 monuments that, right now as we're speaking, thousands of people are looking at my monuments.
Right.
They're just looking at them right now.
Right.
Which is just, I wake up every morning, and that inspires me.
Right.
I actually I'd love to put a camera. I'd love to get like a live cam, like the Eagle cam.
Right.
That is the Eagle. So I'll have an Apollo 11 Eagle cam, right? But like I said, it never occurred to me to make a movie. It never occurred to me, and that's really the story of this interview.
Yeah.
I didn't come out here to be a filmmaker. I didn't come out here to build monuments to the greatest story in the history of the world. But that was my journey, because I got up every morning and I tried to create something.
Yeah.
I never knew, I knew what I thought I wanted, but that didn't always work out. But in these 2 particular cases, it worked out better.
Yeah. I want to be you when I grow up.
Maybe not.
I don't
Maybe
know if that's going to happen. But,
you got a bag? This is your place, right? Is there a Steve Barber wing back here? I can move it right back there.
Yeah. So there is something so powerful about monuments too. I mean, you've tapped into 2 really powerful just things, in my opinion: story and monument. The Bible talks about building an altar. Having a monument where you're honoring someone is so good for us.
It is.
It's so good for us to look back and say, this guy did this, this gal did this. Let's honor what they did, and not just be about ourselves, me, this moment. Right. TikTok, looking back, you know what I mean?
TikTok's the Antichrist. I'm sorry. I can't.
Side note.
I got on there once and I went down in the rabbit hole. I said, I'm done. Never again.
But that just gives such perspective to how did we get here? Right. Who did what to get us here?
Well, I want to talk about the Lundin sculptors. I mean,
please. You
can see their work. They're American beyond American. Their father was a glider pilot in World War II. George and Mark and Joey Boehner, master sculptor. These guys are from Nebraska. They live in Loveland, Colorado, which is right next to Wyoming. But when I met Mark, and they believed in me so much. In fact, a great little side story is when Rocket Mortgage didn't pay right away. It took 5 months to get the first check. So the Lundins were like, Stephen, we need this money. We got a deadline here. And I'm like, well, it's coming. And they're like, yeah, it's coming. My check's in the mail, but we got to have this dough to get moving. And I'm like, well, I can't make it happen any faster than it's going to happen. So we finally got a check in January, and I rushed out to Colorado thinking, okay, guys, I want to film this. So do we have a foot? They'd already had them up. They were up in clay already. I'm like, I walked in and they looked just like that, but they were in clay. And I was stunned. I'm like,
wow.
I go, George. He goes, Barber, we knew you'd do it. We knew you'd get the money. We had to start 4 months ago. We would have never made the timeline.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that was the first time anybody, I didn't know these people. It was a phone call. I never met this guy. This guy believed in me more than I believed in myself. They said, we knew you'd do it. We knew you had the deal. And I was like, wow. I mean, that just, I got really kind of teary-eyed. I was like, nobody's ever believed in me. I said, you guys have made up for every jerk I've ever met in Los Angeles, and there's been many. And they're like, well, we appreciate that. Let's make this happen, you know.
Wow.
And they're like, where's the next check?
Right.
And I said, it's coming. It's in the mail.
Right.
And we did get all the checks. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What a career. Director, producer, writer, filmmaker, monument maker, Stephen Barber.
Well, I don't make monuments. I commission them. I vision them. I can't draw a stick figure. I don't have that kind of talent. But that's where it's a huge collaborative.
Right.
You know, where I'm able to reach out. And like the Lundins aren't just the good sculptors. In my humble opinion, they are the greatest American sculptors in this country. Yeah. And when I met other sculptors, they all say the same thing. They're like, nobody can do what the Lundins do. And they do all this. This is all by hand. I mean, there's no CAD. There's no computer-aided drafting. There's no computer. This is their vision from pictures that they pull off the internet. Yeah. And I mean, look how exact. I mean, that is Jack Schweitzer. Yeah. You know, that is amazing. And they're very lifelike, and they seem to have movement. They actually, I look at that statue, and that statue moves to me, but I'm maybe a little more invested in it than most people.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
It's great to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
Congratulations.
And you'll have that
you've done.
Steve Barber wings.
The Steve Barber
by the end
wing
of
will
summer?
be installed. Yeah, a couple months.
Good for it.
Steve Barber, everybody.
Terrific.
See you next time.